So quite a few days ago, Dr. Jordan Peterson, he uploaded this video titled Message to Muslims. And it was one of the first things I tuned into on the day he uploaded it. And from an honest perspective, from a neutral perspective, when I went through that video, my reaction, first of all, was not abnormal. I did not consider this something too drastic or too significant, if you will, because Dr. Jordan Peterson has addressed Muslim scholars, Muslim Islamic topics, and so on and so forth previously. So it was not something completely novel in that aspect, in that manner, right? But the other thing was that if you focus at the content of that video, my reaction overall was rather blissful, not let alone positive, right? It was blissful because there were two aspects of that. Number one, he addressed, and dare I say, with all due respect, but dare I say that he addressed a community that needed to be addressed, a community that had not only reduced its intellectual debates to a completely obnoxious level since the past few decades. Not only had they reduced the quality of intellectual debates going on, let alone if there are any intellectual debates going on at all, but other than that, it's always much more impactful when the reflection, when the reality check comes from an external pair of eyes. So I believe that was something that the community needed, and it was positive in that sense, right? So these were my reactions. The second aspect was the content, the topics he spoke about. I believe those were the topics that were needed to be discussed, that were needed to come forward and being discussed. And for context, I believe, and I might go into further detail of what those contexts were, but I believe the topics he discussed some of them were really, really essential key topics that since the past maybe a century or so have gradually being sidelined to the borders of intellectual debates and intellectual conversations. These are topics that you would find with great saturation in the earlier time periods of intellectual debates, whether it be of Christian divinity or Islamic doctrine. You will find these topics, a plethora of these topics, in those time periods. But later on, we see a decline in those specific topics that he hinted towards, and I will go in detail what topics am I referring to. But because of these topics in quite recent years being much more sidelined to the borders of intellectual debates, I was glad that they are brought to attention once again, especially on such a widespread platform. So that was good. That was the good part of the video. Now, like I said, overall my reaction was positive. I was glad and happy that there was some important things that were mentioned. But fast forward a few days in, and as I scroll through the internet and so on and so forth, I find out that the Muslim community, that the video itself has gone, as expected, viral in the Muslim world, right? The Muslim internet world, if you will. So all the YouTubers, Instagram influencers, all the internet personalities whose content obviously revolves around Islam, right? These personalities, they started putting out these videos titled response to message to Muslims by Dr. Jordan Peterson and message to Jordan Peterson. There's a plethora of those videos out there already, and that was there. And at first, I did not pay much attention when I saw one or two video, but it was getting crowded, and I was worried. I was like, what is this about? Why is there such a strong reaction? Because so that's the first part of the thing, right? There was a reaction. There was a reaction, And when I stepped into that um, that area, that domain of all this reaction going on, I realized at the very forefront of it that much of it was negative. That was the first impression, right? Because even now, if you Google or YouTube reaction to or response to Jordan Peterson on the message to Muslims, you will find a lot of videos, and almost all of them, with some exceptions, but almost all of them were skewed towards a certain negative emotion, right? And in a strong retaliation emotion. So I believe that was something that was uh, out of the blue. I did not accept that. I did not expect that, right? But and what I mean by negative is was and this is not from a analytical perspective. After watching the entire video, this was the first reaction which I think I have the liberty to have. So this was the first reaction that I went through when I saw all these videos. And it's very easy to spot that. It's easy to spot negativity. And you look at these videos and they are all like, what did Jordan Peterson say? How dare he see that? Response, a strong response to Jordan Peterson. It's there on the internet. I'm not making this up. You can Google it, you can YouTube it. It's there. Majority of them are negative, right? Negative. Now, for being able to have a neutral, let alone justified opinion, I had to watch them. So I watched a couple, and here's my understanding of what was going on. I'll break down those responses in the way that the pattern usually occurs, right? First of all, this was the forefront of these videos, that it's mainly negative. It's negativity inviting. It talks about like I mentioned earlier, that how dare Jordan Peterson talk about Muslims. He does not know anything about Muslims. And mind you, this was not only the perspective, the opinion of these YouTubers, of these people posting these videos, but the more you scroll through the comments, the more you look on forums of the internet, this was also the view of the majority of the community itself. So it's not something just being isolated or highlighted. That's something that the majority believes and says that that is the case. Now, being said that this was the forefront, it was filled with negativity. That how dare Jordan say that, right? But gradually you watch these videos and you see a certain trend. The first trend is because it's the emphasis that they have given is negative, so they have to obviously criticize, right? So the first area of that video in the general trend is criticism. So they criticize, and most of those criticism is nitpicking based to the point that I do not even want to get into these tiny little nitpicks that people did, even though they were no good. And obviously I cannot cover them all either, because there's so many videos and so many nitpicks, and I believe it's not worth it either. But there were so many nitpicks, small tiny things, criticism for the sake of criticism, which I believed was unjustified. I'll give you one example to just put the point out there. There was a part of the video, Jordan Peterson's video, where he said Muslims should conduct themselves in the best of the behavior, the best of the conduct, so that they can set an example, something for the rest of the world to follow and look at and get inspired, not only by them and by their religion, right? So I'm paraphrasing obviously, but he said something along those lines. Now, this is textbook definition advice. And with all due respect, I believe Dr. Jordan obviously got it from the intellectual domain of Muslims, because this is something very, very textbook advice the Muslims give around, right? This is a very normal thing we hear from our teachers, our parents, and so on and so forth. And I believe there's no doubt that the Quran and the Hadith, they very clearly, very explicitly reiterate this advice again and again, that you have to conduct yourself in the best of the manner, in the best conduct, and so that the world obviously sees in a practical demonstration what a Muslim is. And this is something Muslim scholars, those who are genuine, have been saying to the people themselves, right? This has been there for a long time. But these YouTubers, they started sort of attacking it. They were like, no, this is not true. What about, the Western standards of morality? Are we supposed to abide by Western standards of morality? What do you think best conduct, etc., etc.? You get the idea. They were in the mood to reject it, and they rejected it. So that's what I meant. Criticism for the sake of criticism. And the reason I chose this specific advice amongst many others is because this is literally something that Muslims say to Muslims all the time, right? We hear this from Muslims all the time, but we don't see that as problematic. But somebody non-Muslim says it's suddenly problematic, which we'll get into later if that is the case or not, right? So this was the first pattern I noticed. First thing was negativity. The second thing was nitpicking, right? They were nitpicking small ideas, small patterns that I believe need not be nitpicked. And that was criticism for the sake of criticism. Now, the third thing, this is important because it's twofold, right? There's one pattern where Dr. Jordan Peterson talks about, after this conduct thing, he talks about the unity between the Shias and the Sunnis. So he sort of gives a call to action that the Sunnis and the Shia, they need to stop fighting each other and be united, and that they need to be, stop seeing the Christians and the Jews as their friends. Now, obviously, there was also criticism on the point that the Muslims do not see the Christians and the Jews as enemies, etc., etc. And once again, it not only felt nitpicked, it felt extremely defensive. It felt very unnecessarily defensive, because you have to look me in the eye and tell me that in no part of the world is there unjustified hate between the Muslim communities and the non-Muslim communities. And I don't want to name drop, but there are many places where the non-Muslims are in minorities, and the Muslim majorities have done the absolute worst to them. So this is something you have to tell yourself in the mirror that that's not true. But unfortunately, that is the case. And unfortunately, the majority of Muslims who just grow up listening to these tales about hating the Jews cannot even differentiate between a common layman Jew and the Zionist ideology. They cannot differentiate between their religious agendas, religious propagandas, and what is the Muslims' reaction towards the religion Judaism, and the Muslims' reaction towards the political agenda Zionism. They don't know the difference between them. So you have to tell me that that's not the case, that all the Muslims are so well educated and so profound that they can separate the wheat from the chaff, and they know what is politics and what is religion, and they conduct themselves in the best of the manner, and they do not oppress the minorities, because damn well that's not true. So maybe it just hurt you that the Western brought it up, and which is what I meant by the first point when I said that this was a community that needed to be addressed, because in ourselves we lack the capacity to have a completely neutral, non-biased self-reflection. So in that manner, I believe it was a community that needed to be addressed from an external pair of eyes, and it was well addressed. So this was the second point. When Dr. Jordan Peterson brought up the Shia-Sunni unity thing. And then once again, this is textbook advice that Muslim scholars all the time we give to each other, that the Shias and the Sunnis need to be united. The Shias and the Sunnis need to be united, so on and so forth. So again, twofold, right? Shia-Sunni unity amongst themselves, and then the unity of the Muslim community among the Christians and the Jews. So I think I said enough on the pattern of Muslim community to the non-Muslim community. I've talked enough about it that he mentioned it. It was something that needed to be addressed. We have not been able to conduct ourselves in the best you know, if you want to argue over the definition of best, then let's just use the word that we have not been able to conduct ourselves as a community in the way the Sharia actually requires us to. In a way the Sharia requires Muslims to treat non-Muslims. I believe we have failed to do that in many parts of the world. In some part of the world, yes, Muslims have been able to establish that peace, but there are many parts of the world where Muslims have, where the non-Muslims, especially in minority, so you have oppressed them. There's no backing from that. These are, factual evidences. It's everywhere. You go down to the minute towns in Syria and Palestine where there are still Christian minorities, that they are still fighting. All the way up in India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, that there are non-Muslim minorities being treated the worst. So that is there. You cannot deny that. So, but I felt that because of this was the case, that it was brought up, and he said this, and it was a non-Muslim who said this, so on and so forth. So there was a very, very defensive mechanism, and I believe it was unnecessarily defensive. Other than that, the next thing, after the community of Muslim sharing the unity with the non-Muslims, we come back to the original point, which was the Shia and the Sunni unity, right? So Muslim community and non-Muslim, I think we have talked enough about that. Now, within the Shia and the Sunni community, he once again said this call to action, that the Shia and the Sunni needs to stop fighting each other, and they need to form a community. And now this was a point brought up by many of these YouTubers that baffled me, honestly baffled me. I did not know where they was coming from. Maybe I lack context, but it was baffling. A response to both of these points: first, the Muslim community and the non-Muslim community's unity, and second, the Shia and the Sunni unity. To both of these points, the response of the Muslims, or Muslim community majority, or the representatives of the Muslim community, if you will, their response was basically America. That was their response, right? And I tried to see it again and again from different people to try to make sense of it, but it did not. They referred to the invasion of Iraq. They referred to different interference that the United States has had on political levels, and how it has caused several atrocities and problems and oppressions and invasions and bombardings and whatnot. Several political injustices that the United States has done in the Middle East or the Muslim world in general. They referred to that, but I failed to see where they were coming from. And this is what I could understand what was happening. Essentially, they were generalizing. So if it's a Western guy, he's not even American, by the way, I believe he's Canadian. So if it's an American guy telling the Muslims, hey, be united, your response is, but you're American. I don't know where you're coming from for this, because here's the breakdown, right? When you talk about Shia Sunni unity, you talk about the general area starting from Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. And yes, the US has done countless war crimes in these areas, but once again, this is politics and this is intellectual battlegrounds, right? These are two different, same coin, different sides, but two different things, right? So when they are talking about the unity of the Shia and the Sunnis, what exactly are we talking about? Are we talking about how they're not politically united? I doubt that was the message there. It's very easy to look through it. It's not about political unity. It's about intellectual unity. Your schools of thoughts have been separated for centuries now, and you blame America that was formed 300 years from here? I still don't see. I fail to see the logic there. He mentioned a very specific thing that there was this sort of meme going around, and many people talked about it on the internet, that he mentioned that there should be a place where the Shia and the Sunni can come together. A brilliant idea, right? He said there should be a forum that the Shia and the Sunni can use to sort of unite, to come together and talk, right? And their response was well, we had one. The America bombarded it. And I was like, what? What? I fail to see. I am not trying to mock, but I fail to see the context here. What is the point here? As if, are you trying to pretend that the Shia and the Sunni conflict, that the Shia and the Sunni diverged after America emerged? Are you trying to deny Islamic history, that the Shia and the Sunnis have been fighting, killing each other for the throne, for the intellectual differences, for minorities, for text, political reasons, whatnot, before the first of the Westerns even crawl out of land? Are you trying to deny that? Shortly after Islamic caliphates were even formed, you completely, the Muslim community, completely, dismantled themselves into sectarian battles, and you killed each other for what, decades. And I believe this division of what you see as different countries that represent different sects now was the only way that you could stop fighting each other. So you have to once again look yourself in the mirror and say that all these sectarian wars were started by either the Zionists or the United States of America, and before them we were all peacefully coexisting. And you know damn well that that's not true. You know what your own people have been doing in majorities, when they are in majority and the other sect is in minority. Whether you look at Afghanistan, where there's the Sunni majority and the Shiites are in the minority. You look at areas of Pakistan and see how some parts where Shias are in the majority and the Sunnis are in minority. You cannot walk into their mosques. And that's the case everywhere. Wherever one sect has the majority, the other sect in minority is being oppressed. So you have to look me in the eyes, rather look yourself in the eyes and tell yourself that, oh, that's all America, that's all political, that's nothing to do with the fact that we're not well trained and well groomed enough. We're not we do not have enough tarbiyah to be able to differentiate intellectual debates and petty issues and petty battles, and not kill each other on intellectual or otherwise conflicts. So you have to tell me that's not the case, but unfortunately that is the case. No matter where you go, you start from India, you go all the way down to Saudi to Syria, that your own people, we the Muslims, have been fighting each other. We have been neck to neck to each other wherever and whenever we have gotten the chance. So I believe it is biased at best. If not, if I'm being polite, it is a very impulsive defensive reaction that, oh my God, how dare the Western call us out? No, we are not divided, we are united. We both know that's not true. So I believe that was something that was there, that this unity thing, it was a very impulsive defensive reaction, and there was once again something that needed to be said, and the community needed to be addressed, and I think they were well addressed, right? Obviously the message is not perfect, right? But we can talk about that later. So this was the second important passage in that message that kind of spurred weird responses from the Muslim community. Now, other than that, there was another really important message that was discussed, and I believe this was the most important part of the message, and this was what made me rather blissful. He talked about, Dr. Jordan Peterson, he talked about the battle against Luciferian ideologies, and I believe that is something extremely important. Now, here's the thing. For context, this is what's happening, and it's very, very easily noticed in a country like America, where the political situation has sort of just organized itself into this scenario. There's a left, right, and there's a right. I don't know what the political terms they use, but when we try to define them in much more philosophical understandings or sociological understandings, there is a group, let's call them right. They are people who believe in conventional morality, in convention, in tradition, in what has been passed down since their forefathers. The methods of tradition, of convention, of conservativeness, right? orthodox, or you get the idea, right? But then there is the left, right, which is liberal, which is a group of people who do not want to be pinned down to any set of certain ideologies, right? So they completely annihilate the concept of morality whatsoever. They talk about complete freedom of morality or laws, and try to bend basic laws completely into their ideologies. Now, this is something I mentioned earlier, that this was a topic that I believe was very necessary to be mentioned, because this is what Luciferian ideology means. Now, in basic terminology, you can just call it, Satan's propaganda, right? But without going further much into the detail of the topic, the core concept is that the Luciferian propaganda or Satanist propaganda is essentially, or if you want a very simple layman terminology, sin. What sin literally is it's a transgression or a complete aberration of what you would find in nature. So there is a natural law, and then there is the opposite of that. So you either transgress that natural law, or you either go against it. So it all just falls down into tradition and liberalism, right? And obviously we can argue about what tradition means, but for the most part it relies on what, after obviously Islamic tradition has come around. And this obviously segues into much more interesting concepts, such as the idea that all religions, I'm not referring to panism, I'm referring to all religions that were divinely introduced and not man-made philosophies later worshipped as religions. All religions in their origin were divine, obviously, and hence they share a certain set of similarities to each other, because obviously they share the same DNA, they share the same source, right? And that is all what you would say nature compatible, fitra, right? That is the human nature. And you can easily identify that because it's traditional. It's what has been going on around in the world for quite a while, whether you associate it with religion or not. Take any example. I'll just give one example to just illustrate what I'm trying to say. Head coverings. You pick up any religion in the world, you pick up any culture in the world, you pick up any tradition in the world, they involve some sort of head covering, right? You pick up Islam, obviously we have sunnah of head covering. You pick up Christianity, there's the veil. You pick up Judaism, there's the cap, right? You pick up Hinduism, traditionally speaking, they have a veil. And if you look into the Southeast Asian cultures, they also had a similar turban, etc., etc. So there's a head covering going on. This is not the debate of what is fard and what is sunnah and what is wajib. This is a debate of finding common patterns and understanding what convention is, and trying to see if that convention is compatible or the same as what religion is. But I'm not saying that if it exists everywhere it's sunnah or fard. No, that's not the point. The point is, when you are able to identify common patterns, okay, this is tradition, this is safe, in other words, so there's a greater chance. And then obviously you cross check it with Islamic values, but there's a greater chance that is safe. So this is convention. But then liberalism came along, and it's everything against nature and morality and what we know as to be tradition. So they introduced new things that were not done before, or were not accepted even before, or even if they were obviously in a negative connotation. So what liberalism is. I need not speak further, right? So these two ideologies are extremely important for what lies ahead of us. I talked about this in a piece, a mini blog, a mini article, if you will, quite a while ago, and I said that we must now, the only way forward is that we must now declare war against secularism, which is why it is extremely blissful to see that somebody comes along and talks about unity not only on sectarian front but on religious fronts. So we are talking about all the conventional people. If you do not want a panistic idea, which I'm not a fan of either, let's just say all the Abrahamic religions, right? All the monotheistic religions, right? So we want all the monotheistic religion, people of preservation, of conservative values, to be on one side, and that should be our side. Ideally Islam should lead it, but on one side. And when we are on one side, we realize we're not that different, right? So all the monotheistic religions, at least, they are the only preservers of convention, of tradition. And on the other side, there is secularism, which talks about liberalism beyond limits, which has nothing to offer but chaos and annihilation. So these two sides, convention, religion, and liberalism, these are two sides that will vaguely define the fate of the world in coming decades or centuries, that is to see. But I believe that it is important to scrutinize out of this sectarian or even religious feuds. Obviously, you have to remain firm on what you believe in. Having unity does not mean you say it's the same. It's identifying that there are some differences and keeping your beliefs intact, but still working on what you have similar. That's the same message that the Quran gives, right? So this is why I was happy that somebody brought this up on a bigger platform, talking about convention and morality on one side and Luciferian ideologies on other side. And I strongly urge the Muslim community as well other monotheistic communities to understand that this is the fate of the world now. We have to pick sides against not each other, rather against these Luciferian ideologies that have been working quite successfully since the past few decades to completely spoil and annihilate what we understand as nature and as tradition, as a convention. Let's see what else we have. So in conclusion, I would like to talk about the general trend of Muslims, the general pattern and behavior of what and how Muslims partake and behave when somebody, especially non-Muslim, advises them. The general pattern is defense. Our sort of fight or flight mechanism kicks in if some non-Muslim or somebody we just don't like gives us an advice. It is a double-edged sword. On the positive side, you never know the intention of the non-Muslim. You never know the intention of the non-Muslim, right? But on the negative side, there's a good chance that they might be right. So I believe instead of kicking your look at the damage you're causing. Somebody speaks the word Muslim or Islam on the internet, right? He could be a very profound intellectual personality or a random person or a simple layman, but the moment he speaks the word Islam or Muslim, you bite him. So you have become this sort of really gatekeeping, really toxic community that gatekeeps everything and everyone. So somebody dare not speak an ideology that you don't like, or somebody that you don't like dare not speak at all. So I do not believe that there is the right pattern, especially for intellectual communities to come along and become so. I believe that we should invite all to sit down on intellectual grounds and discuss, and let them discuss whether they are Muslims or non-Muslims. It is amazing and perplexing how the Muslims always talk about, we Muslims idealize and romanticize this period that we call the golden age of Islam, right? But and we say this just to fantasize ourselves and just to fancy it and tell our children how beautiful it was. But we talk about this period of intellectual peak. But I think we mentioned this also, but we fail to understand the gravity of what it means when we say that the Muslims, the Jews, and the Christians used to sit down together on the same table and study. The universities and the madrasas that you created, that the Muslims created, did not reach the peak just because they were gatekeeping. Anything other than the convention is not accepted. Going completely liberal is different, obviously. I'm not talking about that. But we were profound enough, we were wise enough to invite all to sit down on the table of intellect and share their due share. And obviously the most important part is you must be able to separate the wheat from the chaff. You need to see, okay, you need to treat every single ideology as neutral. We have this extremely unhealthy habit of either like Nietzsche talks about masters and slaves. We treat either as masters or slaves. So if somebody comes along, we will either treat him as a master, everything he says is absolute, final, and perfect, or we will treat them as a slave, that everything they say is absolutely completely wrong, no matter what they say. And I believe, once again, that's a defense mechanism, right? So I believe both these patterns are on extremes and are extremely dangerous habits. What we should do is treat every single first of all, become such an inviting community that you can allow every single person to come and sit down with us and have what they want to say, what they want to share, without the fear of being completely bitten by this community, right? So allow everybody, be a welcoming community to allow everybody to speak their mind, right? And then obviously, in a very intellectual manner, scrutinize it. Okay, this is the wheat, this is the chaff, this is what we accept, this is what we reject. This is why we accept it, and this is why we reject it. Not because we don't like you so we reject it, we like you so we accept it. No, because on intellectual ground. And I think that is important. That is important and necessary for the Muslim world to not only move forward in their own intellectual capacity, but also to be able to work along with other communities, which I believe is very much the necessity of time.